Well, thank you all for joining us for the first and maybe of many Finance Review Town Hall. We're glad you're here tonight. We just want to be able to explain, one, what the Finance Review Committee is and how they will be functioning. And I am actually just going to turn it over to the Mayor Pro Tem because he is going to chair the Finance Review Committee.
All right.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, and thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate you taking the time out to come listen to topics that aren't all that sexy. So this evening, I'm going to talk about why the City Council created the Finance Review Committee, what the goals are, what financial pressures that we're under as a city, and just talk about municipal finance in general. But before we start, I just want to point out, if you didn't see, there are cards, index cards and pencils off on both the right and the left-hand side. So if you have questions that you know of right now, or if you have them during the presentation, feel free to get up and write them out, and then we'll collect them at the end. We'll address the questions, and then we'll open it up for public comment. If we could have the next slide, please. So I just want to introduce the council and the committee. From City Council, we have Jalen Jennings over here on the left. Mayor Garrett over here on my left, and Jason Hammond on the right. And then as far as committee members, we have Regina Jones, Salim Siddiqui, Timothy Hillman, and Deborah McDonald couldn't make it, but I want to thank all of them for volunteering their time. We've only had one meeting so far, and they're about to sit through pretty much the same information they got last time, so I appreciate their tenacity and all the work that they're going to do in the near future. So if I could have the next slide. So I want to start out with a question. So back in 2008, the city hit its aggregate taxable value was $191.3 million. So by aggregate taxable value, I mean if you take the taxable value of all the properties that we as residents own, the businesses own, and you add it up together, we were worth as a city from a taxable value perspective of $191.3 million. So I want to get start out with some audience participation. So now we're almost 2 decades later. We've had some ups and downs, but the market has been going crazy over the last 4 or 5 years. Home prices are up. So I want to get a sense, what do you think the aggregate taxable value of the city is today, as of the end of fiscal year 23?
About the same.
About the same. Anybody else? 250 million. Anybody else? 300 million. Anyone else? 400 million. Okay. All right. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. We had about the same. We had a 250, a 300, and a 400. Okay. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. So first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the goals and objectives of the committee. And so for a variety of reasons, and we're going to discuss all of these later, our city is having increasing difficulty coming up with the revenue that we need to provide the services that our residents expect from us. And there's a lot of examples of that. Just to throw out a few, we no longer have a recreation director because we don't have the $70,000 in salary and benefits lying around to pay for that. The biggest example I can think of is our road system. So normally cities will take money from their general fund and use it to maintain the roads, but for decades we really haven't had enough money to do that in any significant manner. So as a result of that, we all know what happens. Our roads crumbled, and we were forced to, if we were going to do any type of significant improvement project, we had to vote on a millage to do the 3-year road program that we just did. The HVAC system in this building needs to be replaced, but instead we don't have the capital money to do that, so we put $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year as it continues to break. Our playgrounds, the equipment there is outdated. It's not ADA compliant. A lot of it needs to be replaced. We've got trucks where there are literally no floorboards, where our DPW drives the truck and they look down and they see the road underneath them. We've got a backhoe that's outlived its useful life by 5 to 10 years. Our town, we haven't produced in our town. I don't remember how long it's been now, because that costs us, $8,000 a year. And another great example that I think is really current, we have the Southfield Road construction project going on, and we've got a lot of complaints, and we knew this was going to happen with cut through traffic, people running stop signs, speeding. If we had the discretionary funds, we could have a couple extra patrol cars going around all day. But again, that costs a lot of money to do that, and we just haven't been able to do that. And then adding to that pressure, we know that at the end of this year, our police contract is up, and what we've seen from similar communities is that based on what we've seen from similar communities, we're expecting somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 more cost with respect to our police department. So that's going to put an incredible strain on our budget, which could mean potential loss of services. So over the years we've been continually belt tightening, trying to get rid of cut our expenses wherever we could. Our fiscal year 25 budget, which starts on July 1st, is balanced. Mike did a great job, as a new city administrator coming in right in the middle of budget season, and was able to find ways to increase our revenue and decrease our expenses, which is great. And we're projected to put, what was it, 25,000, into the general fund, which isn't a lot, but it's better than what we've done the last several years. Earlier this year, I spent about 3 months doing a financial analysis and was able to come up with a lot of recommendations, some of which we've implemented, some of which we're still talking about, and some of which are time dependent. So, things like we have to wait for contracts to expire before we go out and competitively rebid. So some of those things will help, but what we really need is to find a sustained way to increase our revenue in a significant way. That also allows us to grow the general fund from year to year. And so that's really our committee goal, is to look for ways to potentially increase our revenue. And at the end of the meeting, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about what some of the other communities are doing, and those are things that we'll probably discuss as a committee. And the other thing I just really want to stress is we've made no decisions whatsoever. Everything is on the table. We've only had one meeting, and so there's still a lot to talk about, and we'll talk about what some of those things are. So what I want to do is start out by just kind of laying a base level knowledge, because I think the more that our residents understand municipal finance, I think the better they can participate in providing suggestions to the committee and discussing with council, and we can have a much better dialogue. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the city funds, or essentially the city accounts. So we have multiple funds or accounts. So we've got a water and sewer fund, we've got a major road fund, a local road fund, and then our general fund. And there are others, but those are the four major ones. So real quickly, the water and sewer fund is really a separate enterprise system, and it's completely funded by the water bill. Okay, so it's kind of like a quasi-business that the city runs. And I want to be clear that it is a separate entity. So no money from that fund can be transferred to other funds like the general fund. So there's rumors out there that the city has been using the water and sewer fund to prop up the general fund. That's just simply false. If we did that, we would be severely reprimanded from the state from doing that. So that has not happened. But the point I want to make is that is one of our funds, but that's not the purview of our committee. We're not going to be looking at the water and sewer fund. Likewise, the road funds, we're not going to look at those either. Those are funded typically through Act 51 money that comes from the state, and like I said, when we have some general fund money, we can direct it and augment that money, but that fund, but that hasn't happened all that much, at least not in a significant way. So what we're going to focus on as a committee, and what I'm going to talk most about tonight, is the general fund. Okay, and so the general fund it comprises all of our operational expenditures. So things like the police, the fire, the DPW, the library, employee salaries, office equipment, recreation, all the day-to-day kinds of things that we do as a city. And it's basically where all of our operational revenue goes and where all of our expenses come out of. So you can kind of think of it as the city's checkbook. And the primary source, there's a lot of sources of revenue, but the primary source of revenue is property taxes. So we're all homeowners here, and so basically each of our properties has a taxable value associated with it, And so what we do every year is we multiply that taxable value times the city's millage rate, and that's how much money you're contributing to the operations of the city. And by charter, our millage rate is 20 mils. But what we're actually assessing as a city is 17.5 mils. And actually, I just found out a few minutes before the meeting started that we're actually, we just found out it's only going to be 17.3 mils. So it's actually fallen a little bit more. And why that is, I'm going to get into that a little bit more. So traditionally, our city has been able to grow our general fund from year to year, meaning at the end of the year, after we've done all of our expenses, we've had a little bit revenue left over, and we've been able to grow that balance in the general fund. But the last 3 years, we've been under mounting pressure. Actually, we've been under mounting pressure for a while, but the last 3 years, it's really started to take a hit. So our general fund in the last 3 years went from $1.6 million as a balance down to 1.2, and then last year, it dropped down to about $600,000. So obviously, that's not a tenable situation, for us to continue drawing out of that account, which is, again, a big reason why we've tasked this committee. So typically, the best practices for cities is that the general fund represents about 20% of the annual expenditures from that fund, and right now we're at about 11%. So again, that's not great, and so we need to fix that. So that kind of begs the question. It's kind of the elephant in the room. So why don't we have the revenue that we had 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and that allows us to continue providing services and investing in our future. And then the other thing I hear from residents all the time is we pay such high taxes, and we do. Every one of us sitting up here is a taxpayer as well. So we know that we pay very, very high taxes. So I get questions like, well, with this huge check I'm sending, why can't we have a recreational coordinator? Or why can't we fix the HVAC system in here? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So those are the two major questions that I kind of want to address over the next several comments. So in terms of the revenue issues we have, those are really driven by 5 factors. There's actually a few more, but 5 major factors. And those are the market crash that we had in 2008, when the real estate market crashed, Proposition A, the Headley Amendment, reductions in state shared revenue, and then generally inflation. So I want to talk about each of these. And I'm going to start out with Proposition A. So Proposition A was legislation that was passed by the state in 1994. And the design of Proposition A was to control the amount of property taxes that we as residents in the state of Michigan are paying. So as our market values of our homes was going up, that we all didn't get taxed out of our houses. So basically what Proposition A does, and I think a lot of you probably know this, it limits the taxable value growth of an individual property in a given year to the lesser of inflation, or 5%. So if this year inflation is 3%, your taxable value of your home is going to go up by 3%. If the market value of your home goes up 10%, this year, then your taxable value is only going to go up 5%. So it controls how much your taxable value is going to go up in a given year. So essentially what's happened over this past couple decades is we've had, for the most part, we've had big market value increases in our homes, but Prop A has protected all of us so that the actual taxable value, again, can only go up a maximum of 5%, so it only goes up in increments. So while your market value of your home is going up like this, your taxable value is only going up like that. And so what we've had in the last several decades is big market value increases with generally low inflation. And so what you run into, and I know most of you, and most of us have been in our homes for 20, 25, 30 years, so you run into situations where you have a homeowner who's been in their house for 35 years, they could sell their home for $420,000, but their taxable value is only $70,000 because Prop A has protected them from year to year to year. And so in theory, what's happened is Prop A has done exactly what it was intended to do. It protected homeowners over time, and I'm seeing head shakes, and then no head shakes as well. So it did what it was designed to do. But unfortunately, the big mistake that the legislature made is they assumed that property values were always going to go up, because they always had up to the point where they passed that law. So in 2008, we all know what happened. You had the real estate market crash, and almost overnight, our taxable values fell almost in half. So as a city, we lost $75 million in taxable value almost overnight. And it stayed that way through about 2014. So what that meant is that our revenue dropped by almost 50%. Okay, so we had half the money we had. And so when I talk about this with people, the question that I usually get is, okay, yeah, well, that was 17 years ago, almost 2 decades ago, and the market has totally recovered and then skyrocketed past where we were in 2008. So why would this still have an effect on us now? And the reason is goes back to Prop A. If you remember, we can only go up in terms of our taxable value in very small increments year over year. And so assuming that, you know, we have 5% growth every year, you know, it's still going to be towards the end of, you know, still going to be several more years before we get back to our taxable value and our revenue of 2008. That's assuming 5%, but our auditors tell us it's probably going to be closer to the end of the 2020s. So I always pose this question to people. I said, imagine, well, I'm looking at it, almost half the people in this room are retirees, so go with me on this. But, you know, imagine you go into work tomorrow and your boss tells you, well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut your salary by 50%. And you know what? Your job is so unique, there's nowhere else you're going to be able to be employed, and you're going to have to stay here for 17 years. So what's going to happen? Your discretionary income is going to go away. So the vacations that you had planned, you're not going to buy a basketball hoop for your kids. You know, if your AC unit needs to be replaced, you're going to repair it instead of replace it. If you need a new roof for $25,000, you're going to patch it because you're not going to have the money to make those expenditures. Well, that's the same thing that the city has been going through for the past 17 years. So that's why our HVAC system, we keep repairing it. That's why our playgrounds have old equipment, why our roads didn't get worked on. And these things just get deferred from these expenses, and these things that we need to spend our money on get deferred from year to year to year. And actually, if you look at our capital improvement plan, there are about $20 million of expenditures that we've identified that the city needs. So again, you know, with this lowered revenue, we're never going to get to a point where we can make those expenditures. So every year, like this year, you know, we tried to make a few of those expenditures, and that pulls money out of the general fund. So that's kind of the first chokehold that the state has on us. The second one, and if you could advance the slide, Mike, I'd appreciate it. The second one is the Headley Amendment. The Headley Amendment is somewhat similar to Prop A in that it was designed to control the amount of taxes that a city could collect from its residents. So whereas Prop A was really focused on the residents, Headley was really focused on the cities. And basically what it says is that in any year where the aggregate taxable value of the city goes up from one year to the next, the city is required to drop or roll back its millage rate that it assesses to the residents so that it gets no more revenue than it got in the prior year with an adjustment for inflation. Okay, so in this example here, you know, it's an oversimplified example, but I guess you can see it. I don't need to point. You know, let's assume in year one that the aggregate taxable value of the city is $100 million, and let's assume that the millage rate was 10 mils. So what we would do is we'd take that $100 million, multiply it by 0.010, which is 10 mils, and that would get us $1 million, and that would be the revenue that the city would get from taxes in this situation. Now we go to year two, and the aggregate value of the city, the taxable value, has gone up to 110 million. So what Headley says is that we have to roll back the millage rate that we assess to the residents, in this case down to just a little over 9 mils, so we only get that same $1 million that we got in the prior year. And again, there is a small adjustment in there for inflation. So essentially what happens is over time, as our aggregate taxable value goes up, which it typically does, our millage rate keeps falling and falling and falling, and it can only go down. It can't go back up. So for example, in 2008, when we lost that $75 million of taxable value overnight, the state didn't say, okay, Lathrup, raise your millage rate back up. We had to still keep our millage rate, you know, where it was at that point. So there's only a couple ways that we could drive revenue. And so one thing that can happen, or actually let me step that back, say that a little differently. There's only one way that we can counteract Headley, and that's doing something called the Headley override. And Lathrup Village did this in 2010. And basically what that is, it's the city having a vote, citywide vote, which they voted in favor of this Headley override. And it's basically the residents telling the city and the state that we understand Headley, but we want to take the millage rate and put it back where it's supposed to be. So at that time, in 2010, again, I told you our chartered millage rate is 20 mils. By the time we got to 2010, the millage rate was all the way down to 16 mils. So we had lost 20% of our ability to tax the residents because of Headley. And so what we did is the voters passed that, and so we put the millage rate back up at 20 mils. And that was in 2010, and as we know, taxable values or market values stayed the same until about 2014 when they started to go up again. And as they started to go up, the millage rate started to fall again. And so here we are now in 2024, and our millage rate has dropped down to 17.3 mils. So that's one way that Headley can be overridden. But in terms of our revenue as a city, the only way for us to counteract Headley and get more revenue is to build more buildings outside of the business district. And as everybody here knows, we're built out, which means that we don't have the ability to build new buildings. So what that means is that our revenue is going to remain stagnant in perpetuity because of Headley. Okay? And I was very specific in the way that I said that, where I said outside of the business district. And the reason why I said it that way is in the business district. So for example, what was it, about a decade ago, maybe that's a little bit too far, maybe it was 7-8 years ago, I don't remember, but Michigan First had a major expansion, and the taxable value of that property skyrocketed. Right now, Surnow is working on plans to renovate the school, and if that happens, the taxable value of that property is going to skyrocket. But those properties are in the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority District, and so any increases in revenue that we get from them will go to the DDA, not the city. Okay, so it doesn't help us out. Now, the one good thing is, and this is, I don't know if I would say this is unique, but we have a very good working relationship with our DDA. And so we have a cost-sharing agreement with the DDA, so the DDA has been very good about helping the city with our expenses. So for example, code enforcement, they pay for half the code enforcer. And there are many other ways that they help. But that's just one example. So we would hopefully be able to get some of those funds to help run the city. But again, it's a terrible problem that we have as a built-out city because Headley really chokes us. So that's Headley. If you can go to the next slide, please, Mike. The next one is, the next kind of stranglehold on the city is state shared revenue. So we as residents and as a city, we pay a lot of money in taxes to the state. And by statute and by constitution, the state is required to give revenue sharing back to all of the municipalities in the state. And what the state has done over the years, over the last couple of decades, in order to balance their own budget, is they've restricted the amount of revenue sharing that they are providing the municipalities. So they're giving them less than they're constitutionally and statutorily required to give the municipalities. And there have been a lot of lawsuits about this, and unfortunately the state has prevailed in all of them. I think there might be one that's still going on. And as my own Bruce editorial is, I think one of the reasons why the state prevails is because if the state lost those lawsuits, they would go bankrupt, because they would have so much money, billions and billions of dollars, that they would owe the municipalities. But that's an editorial. But the way that affects the city is, the MML, the Michigan Municipal League, has calculated that from 2002 to 2020, the city has received $2 million less in state revenue sharing than we are required to get from the state. And you can see in the chart here, back in 2001, we were getting about $525,000 in revenue sharing. It dropped down here to the low point of about $325,000, stayed that way, and then it slowly climbed up a little bit. We're still not back to where we were in 2001. But you can see, again, that's all money that we should have been getting over time that we could have been putting towards I keep using the same examples, but towards the HVAC, towards the playgrounds, towards fixing up the community room and so forth. But we didn't get that money, so again, more deferred, deferred fixes and deferred purchases of things that we needed as a city. Next slide, please, Mike. This slide here, this slide covers the first decade in that last slide. So that last slide covered 2 decades. Over the first decade, this slide, it's just fascinating to me. It shows for the 50 states, it shows the growth in municipal revenue from 2002 to 2012. So within that decade. So percentage-wise, how much more or less did each of the states give their municipalities in terms of revenue? How much did it grow over that decade? And so you can see for 46 of the states, it increased. They gave their cities more revenue as that decade progressed. And if you did a regression, it's probably averages somewhere around 30%. And then you have 4 states only that went the other way, that gave their cities less money. And if you look all the way out to the right there, that long red bar facing downward is Michigan. So over that 10 years, they gave their municipalities 60% less revenue than they did at the beginning of the decade. And that trend continued on, as you saw as the graph, probably not as steep, but it's still a big issue. Okay? So again, another way that the city is being strangled by the state and the tax laws. So now there are a couple other minor, I guess, daggers or strangleholds that we also deal with. I get asked a lot about uncapping, and we all know that Lathrup is a very desirable place to live. We sell a lot of houses in Lathrup. People leave Lathrup and those houses sell pretty quickly. And so what uncapping is to go back to that example that I gave earlier, where you have a 35-year resident who has been protected by Prop A for those 35 years, and their market value is $420,000, but their taxable value is only $70,000. If they sell that home, that $70,000 taxable value gets reset or uncapped. And so what happens is it typically gets reset to half the market value of the home. So instead of being $70,000 for the new homeowner, it's going to be $210,000, so half of the market value. And so what ends up happening is that new homeowner pays 3 times more taxes than the previous homeowner. And so I get the question all the time. It says, well, we sell a lot of homes. That should be generating a lot of revenue for the city. But the problem is Headley essentially consumes, in that first year, for example, Headley consumes that increase. So while that one taxpayer is paying 3 times more, that new $210,000 taxable value gets factored into the Headley calculation. And if you remember what I talked about, when the aggregate taxable value increases of the city, the millage rate has to drop. So that one house is going to cause the millage rate to drop ever so slightly. So all the rest of us are going to pay slightly less. You may pay $3 less, you may pay $5 less, you may pay $10 less, depending on the value of your property. But what ends up happening is that one property owner pays a lot more, everybody else pays less, and the city ends up with a net zero. Okay, it's one of the things that the Michigan Municipal League has been trying to get the legislature to change, but they haven't had the appetite to do so at this point. So that's another way that we're kind of disadvantaged. 2 other things real quickly. Inflation. We all know inflation has been really high the last 3 years. 7%, 6.5%, and 3.4% respectively over the last 3 years, which has significantly reduced the city's buying power. And then, salaries are inflated too. So for example, we all know how tight the job market is. And, we hear all the time, even from our own businesses in the city, that they can't get employees. And what that does is that inflates the salaries. And we've had a lot of turnover. We have a lot of new staff, and those staff are coming in at higher salaries than the prior staff. So inflation is having a big effect. And then lastly, again, looking out in the audience, a lot of us are longtime residents. Another thing that we as long-term residents don't think of is that there are a lot of expenses that municipalities have that they didn't have 30 years ago when we moved into our homes, or even 15 years, even 10 years. So things like tasers for the police force, you know, those things cost $50,000 for our police force, and they're only good for, what is it, three years, 5 years?
4 to 5.
4 to 5 years, and then we have to replace them. Body cams and the data storage associated with those body cams, data archiving expenses, data servers, data security, building security. You know, since 9/11, you know, there's heightened focus on security. Building sanitation since COVID. You know, we do a lot more, you know, building sanitation. Mandated training. Our officers have all sorts of training that they have to go to that costs money. And then another thing that comes to mind, software licenses. You know, there's all sorts of software that we have that hits us for $5,000, $10,000 a pop for annual software licenses. These are all things we didn't have 20 years ago. So again, it adds more pressure. So all of these things together are really the reasons why this committee has been tasked, because we're finding it more and more difficult to find ways to control our expenses so that we can still give you as residents the services that you expect. So now to go back to the question that I threw out a little bit earlier about the aggregate taxable value of the city. So again, back in 2008, when we were at the all-time high, it was 191 million. And so, you know, I asked, you know, what do you think it is today? And Alan, you were right. But we had people say 250, 300, 400, 400 million. And if you're looking at the market value of the city, absolutely, or it's probably more than $400 million. But right now, or actually fiscal 93, when I last looked, it was 163 million. So actually $28 million off of what it was in 2008. And from a monetary perspective, if you look at that at a 20 mil tax rate, you're talking about a loss of $550,000 of revenue just from Prop A. Okay, so again, not great. All right, so let me get into so that kind of talks about why we have the committee, what are some of the financial pressures that we're dealing with. The other question that I want to answer is the question that we hear all the time, and again, we all experience as residents, about our high taxes. You know, again, people say, well, I get all that stuff you just talked about, but we really do have high taxes. Most of you know we have some of the highest taxes in the state. So again, it still doesn't make sense to me as, you know, how come we can't fix the roads and you know, replace equipment and get a new backhoe and those kinds of things. So Mike, if you could hit the, oh, you're one step ahead of me. So the chart that I've got up here now, this is showing all of the millage rates that we pay as a city. So, you know, here's the general operating at 20 mills. Headley has lowered that to 17.5, and like I said, I found out just before the meeting, it's actually 17.3. So it's actually fallen a little bit more, so we're getting a little bit less tax revenue. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is we have a separate millage in our charter for garbage and recycling. It's 3 mills by the charter, and again, that's dropped to 2.6. Actually, you know, again, I found out a few minutes ago it's 2.5. So again, think about that. You know, we continually renew our contract with our waste hauler. That contract gets more expensive every year, and every year we get less money from the residents to pay for it. So again, it's just another financial hit. We pay county taxes. So 5.26 is the statute. Headley's rolled that down to about 3.9. And then there's all sorts of regional taxes that we're hit up with. You know, the zoo, the DIA, the Oakland County Public Transit Authority and so forth, which hits us for about another 2 mills. You'll see the road millage there at 3.9 mills. Now the one, I guess, good thing is that Headley can't touch millages that are designed to pay back debt. So the city doesn't get handcuffed on that one. So we're still getting the exact amount of money that we need to pay back the road millage. And then all sorts of school millages. We've got local millages, we've got state millages, we've got OCC for Oakland Community College, special ed millages, and when you add it all up, we're paying 57 mills, which is a lot of mills. And then the other thing I included here too, just for educational purposes, I guess, is that the businesses also pay some specific millages. They pay 18 mills for the schools, and then they pay 2 mills for the DDA because they're in the DDA district, and that's via Headley down to 1.8. And in fact, just to be even more technical, we do have some residents that pay that DDA millage because we do have some condos on 11 Mile Road, and those people are in the DDA district, so they get hit up with yet another 2 mills of tax. But the big thing here, the big takeaway from this is really, we pay a lot of taxes, but a lot of it doesn't go to the city. And can I have the next slide, please, Mike? Looking at it visually really kind of tells tells the story. So here you can see visually. So this is the 57 mills that we have, and what percentage goes to what category. So you can see education takes 47% right off the top. So when you send that check, almost half of it goes right to education. 7% goes to the county, 3% to the region for the DIA and the zoo. Down here you have the street millage is 7%, 3 or 5% for refuse, and then the 31% that's left over is for general operating. And I actually broke out 2% of that because we have a contract with the Southfield Public Library that requires us to pay them 1 mil every year. So basically what we're left with is that 29%. So less than a third of what you're paying in that check that you write out twice a year to the city stays with the city. So that's a big reason, why, or a big answer to the question of what we pay such high taxes, why don't we have the money? Well, a lot of that tax doesn't go to us. And then, next slide, please, Mike. The other thing that then is, so the city gets that, I said 31%, so that I included the 2% for the library. So that 31%, what does the city do with the 31%, or the roughly about a third that it hangs on to? And another big surprise to a lot of people is over half of that money goes to public safety. So 58% of that goes to public safety. 6% to the DPW, 14% here for government services, so that's things like the building department, cable TV, auditing, city communications, engineering, planning, things like that. Administration, 19%, salaries and benefits for the employees. Building and grounds, so our parks, the city hall, maintaining that, only 3%. And that little slice there that you can't even see because it rounds to 0 is recreation. So that's how the city is using the money. Next slide, please, Mike. The other thing I kind of like to do here as well, because again it helps put the feel of money to you when you see these numbers. This is that same 35-year 70,000 taxable value example that I threw out earlier. That resident is going to pay roughly around $4,000 in taxes. Now keep in mind that a new resident on that same house would be paying $12,000, not $4,000. So that $4,000, almost $2,000 of it goes to education. 280 to the county, 126 to the region, 277 for the streets, and then really the operating amount is roughly about $1,200. And then next slide, please, Mike. And then when the city hangs on to that $1,200, 722 of it goes to police and fire. So there's $500 left from that check to do all the things that we need to do as a city. So public service, DPW, pay the employees, buildings and grounds, all that kind of stuff, and recreation, whole $6 out of that check, So that just kind of helps to answer the question, or explain where your taxes go. We do have high taxes. Again, we all pay them as well, but it's the fact that 2/3 of it goes somewhere else. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mike for a few minutes, just to talk a little bit about our budget that we had this year, as well as why we have a lot of pressures coming up in the next year, and then I'll finish it up with a few options that we have, and then we'll deal with the questions.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm naturally not going to talk as long as Bruce. He covered a lot of what was already in the budget and everything like that. But as we have essentially brand new staff here this year, we had fresh eyeballs on everything this city does. Michelle and her team, myself, dug into this for the past 6 months for me, past few months for Michelle, and we have a balanced budget. That's what we can be proud of for a city. That's our goal every single year, is to have a balanced budget. Unfortunately with us, as Bruce mentioned at the very beginning, we're only projecting a net roughly $25,000 next year for our general fund. While that's great, if we have one emergency, that's gone and we're back into dipping into our fund balance. So as Bruce mentioned, good example, if HVAC goes out, instantly gone. But for us, we feel like we're accomplishing a lot next year. We're starting to slowly address some of the needs for the city, specifically at the DPS. Public services crew, they were outsourced years ago. And what has happened since is they've kind of been neglected. Their equipment is old, their building's old. So we put an emphasis this year on getting them equipment to serve the community. New trucks, new storage out there to meet Eagle requirements, just new equipment and make their building actually usable. And as for future budget pressures, we have a lot over the next few years, which is why we created this committee to kind of explore that. So just covering a lot of them, Bruce talked a lot already. Inflation, we all know, we all feel it at home. 4% is that average over the past decades, high as 7. While you feel it at home, we feel it extremely at the city. Police department union negotiations, Bruce mentioned that. We're expecting a big hit. There's no ways around that. Every negotiation I've been a part of, salaries are gonna get increased. There's no doubt about that. There's gonna be other things we can negotiate to hopefully offset some of that cost. But at the end of the day, we have a great accredited police force and we want to keep them happy, and while also being safe financially for the city. Facilities. City Hall, built in 1970s. You guys walk around, you can tell it has not had a lot of love since 1970 when it was constructed. It's showing its age. It needs funding to, one, keep staff safe who is here every day, and then serve the community who want to use this community room and the other facilities every single day. Infrastructure. Kudos to the city for issuing bonds over the past few years to start addressing some of the infrastructure. However, that bond money is gone. We need to continue addressing the streets and utilities, and that's going to need funding. And then something I've heard a lot over the past 6 months since I've been here is, why doesn't the city go after more grants? Why are we not securing grants for our parks and everything else? That requires matching funds. Realistically, at minimum, typical grants require 20%. So for example, municipal park playground, the goal was to have that done this year. That's $1 million project. So out of nowhere, if we were to secure, say, a DNR trust fund grant to do that, the city still has to come up with $200,000 from somewhere to make that project a reality. So these are not easy problems for the city to find solutions to. So that's why this committee and our staff have to dive into it every single day. So while we do have a balanced budget, and I feel like we are going to be successful over this next year as staff for the city, these next few years, we're going to be in a tricky situation. There's no doubt about that.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right, so with all that, knowledge or education now from, understanding, all the pressures that we have, what are our options? What are other communities doing? So the one thing to stress, this is not a Lathrup Village specific problem. Every community is having these same problems to different degrees depending on the makeup of the community. So a community that has a lot of buildable space or has a big, bye Jason, has a thriving, downtown area, it's not gonna hit them quite as hard. But if you're a built out community like us, it's tough, and there are lots of other communities that are going through the same thing, and as a result of that, they are doing things to increase their revenue as well. Now, one of the I guess the downsides is that we are governed by, well, I shouldn't say downside, that's a bad way of putting it, but there's a lot of limits to what we can do and the creativity that we can use to garner more revenue. So there aren't a ton of options, but, and again, I just want to stress again, we have not started talking about any of these options other than just a brief introduction of what they are. But one option is to do nothing, right? I mean, we could not do anything to increase revenue, and we could figure out ways to cut services. I mean, we could maybe do more outsourcing. Maybe we close City Hall for, a day a week, or, I don't know what. what the options are. I mean, there's not a lot, but I can talk about that in a minute. But I mean, that's an option. Do nothing and cut services and just keep going. I mean, that's one option. Another option is a Headley override, like we did in 2010. So we could do a Headley override to both of our general operating and refuse millage. Again, that's what they did in 2010. Now the one thing I think that they didn't do in 2010 that they should have was put a Headley lock. So Ferndale, for example, 10 years ago, they did a Headley override and they set their millage rate back to 20. Their chartered millage rate is 20 as well. But what they did is they put a 10-year lock on it. And what that means is that it goes back up to 20 and it stays at 20 for 10 years. And then Headley can start lowering that millage again. So they did 10 years. Other communities have done 5 years. Some have done 3 years. So that's something that we may talk about as a committee of doing a Headley and putting a lock on it. Had we put a lock on it in 2010, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation for another 2 or 3 years or something like that. But so that's one option. Another option, and again, just to stress, a Headley override would require a vote of the residents to approve it. Another option is a public safety millage. Some communities have done this because it's a little bit more palatable to the residents because it's directly supporting the police and fire. And basically what that is we could do a public safety millage, let's say 3 mills. So 3 mills, 1 mill gets us about roughly $200,000 of revenue. So 3 mills would get us about $600,000 of revenue. And that money, again, if voters approved it, because it would have to go to the voters, that money would be specifically used for public safety. And so what that would mean is that the city then would have $600,000 in the general fund that they would no longer have to put towards the general fund, put towards public safety, and then they could use that money for other things. So sometimes communities find that a little bit more palatable, and again, we'll talk about that. Another option is a special assessment district. So I think the city of Davison did this recently. So we could make the entire city a special assessment district, and this is something that city council would act upon. And then each year, city council, as they're doing their budget, could determine what special assessment millage we would assess. So for example, one year it might be 1 mill, another year it might be 3 mills, one year it might be no mills. So that's another option that's possible. And then there could be other other things that we haven't thought of. We do need to spend a little bit more time researching what other communities have done, but these are essentially the ones that are being done most often. So those are things that we're going to consider. And again, we haven't made any decision yet. So I think that's it. Yeah. So you want to pass your cards up and we can go through them, and then we can try to answer the questions the best that we can. Oh, you know what? One more thing while Mike is collecting the cards. I meant to talk about this. Oh, thanks. I meant to talk about this when I was talking about Headley override as an option. So in 2010, when they did the Headley override, prior to doing that, they did a lot of cuts. So the DPW was outsourced. They removed family health care for employees, eliminated retiree health care, eliminated the pension program for a 401k, did things like transfer the concerts series to the community foundation, extended the community center used to generate more revenue. So there were some things a lot of things that they did. But in going over all of the expenditures and the way that we're spending money, a lot of these things were one-time hits, right? We can't outsource the DPW again. We can't hand off the concerts to another organization. We're not going to take away health care from our employees because the things have already been cut. So as we looked for things, obvious things. There really weren't a whole lot of obvious candidates to cut. So I just wanted to make that statement. So why don't you read the questions in that way? Sure. And then anybody chime in if the questions are coming in.
Yeah, I'm just going to read them in the order that they were presented up here. So the first question is, what is the budget/cost for the DDA? Question mark. Supposedly self-funded? Question mark. I lived in Lathrup Village from 1992 to 2004, and now again starting in 2017. I see no progress in a downtown development. How effective is the DDA, and do we need it? Question mark.
Okay, I'll start that and then turn it over to Mike. Yep. So the way that the DDA is funded is through the 2 mills that I talked about, that all the businesses that live in the DDA district are assessed, as well as the few homeowners. The other way it's financed is what's called tax incremental financing. And basically what happened is we set up the DDA in 1988 and 1989. And so basically 2 different districts were set up. And for simplicity, let's just say we set the whole thing up in 1988. So at that point, we took a snapshot of what is the taxable value of each individual business at that point. What is the taxable value of the DDA district? And then as the taxable value grows, that incremental revenue goes to the DDA. So the city still gets its revenue from taxes based on, here to whatever the snapshot amount was, but then any additional revenue that comes in from growth in their taxable value goes to the DDA. And that's the primary funding source for the DDA.
So the other part of it is, how effective is the DDA, and do we need it? So, I mean, one thing is, if you've looked at last night's agenda and the budget segment, there was a page that talked about the current expenditures and revenues for the city, and the DDA line has a deficit. Well, it was a planned expense for the DDA to improve alleyways. So there's, again, money being saved year over year in that specific case, in order for the DDA to decide to utilize it for specific projects. So one thing the DDA does is maintain the alleyways in the DDA district. That's just one example. The DDA also is obviously supporting beautification programs. People may not like the flower pots that you see throughout the city, but they are funded by the DDA. They're contributing to the cost of the Lathrup Village Music Festival. They have a sign grant program that a number of businesses in the city have taken advantage of in order to draw more business into the local businesses. So those are just a few examples of benefits. The other thing is, so if you disband the DDA and say we don't need it anymore, well, what happens to the tax revenue that the DDA is collecting?
And that tax revenue goes back to the sources that are allowing us to keep the money. So for example, the county, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but the county, as part of the DDA agreement, allows us to keep the county tax for the businesses that are in the DDA district. So that money would have to go back to the county. Same thing with the other taxing authorities. All that money would go, the businesses are hit with those same taxes, and those would have to go back to those authorities. So the city wouldn't, that money wouldn't all of a sudden come to the city. The other thing that Jason left out is that there is a cost sharing agreement with the DDA. So they pay percentages of the salaries of some of our employees. They pay percentages of other things. Like I said, the code enforcer, they pay for 45% of the salary and benefits, I think it is. Beautification, I think isn't there a cost sharing for some of the lawn services and things like that. So I don't remember all of them, but again, like I said, we're lucky because we have a very good relationship with our DDA. In other cities, it's not the case. In some cities, it's that's my money. They're fighting over the buckets of money that so that they can each control it. So we work real well with our DDA.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say additionally, DDAs also have a flexibility in what they're able to do with their funding that is outside the scope of law for general funds. So outside of marketing, they're able to say we have vacant buildings. They could purchase vacant buildings, rehab them, and sell them. So they have a very unique flexibility under the eyes of the state law that just the general fund is not privy to. So from my perspective, it is a benefit to the city.
Yeah, the other thing, actually, just thinking about, and I'm sure this will put a smile on everybody's face because we've all been hearing this for 30 or more years. You know, you've got the Boulevard project that we've all been talking about. You know, we put in for what's known as a RAISE grant with the city of Southfield and the city of Beverly Hills. You know, the whole project, you know, from where is it supposed to start? 10 Mile to a little south of 10 Mile to 13.5 Mile. It's a $110 million project, and the RAISE grant that we applied for is for the south end of that. And if that happens, if we get that grant, you know, that would be in 2027. But the reason why I bring this up is because if this project happens and if we are able to move forward with it over the years, one of the big things that the DDA is doing is collecting money, because we're going to have responsibilities along with that project. So there's going to be paying for certain buildings, paying for certain properties, paying for certain improvements. So we're going to have a cost share, and the DDA is, you know, saving a lot of their money for that. Now, I know that the DDA made some decisions to spend down a little bit this year on some of the alleyway approaches and the alleyways and the approaches, but they did that knowing that they've got a lot of money coming in, you know, to grow the balance again. So.
Okay, the next question is, between 2019 and 2023, unfunded pension liability increased between $2.2 and $2.8 million. Do any new administrative staff receive MERS pension benefits?
So we have maybe 2 active employees that might be eligible, and we just had another person retire who is eligible. So this is one of the downfall. It's one of those items in local government that's always up for discussion. That's why you see a lot of communities that got rid of pensions 10 plus years ago. But that's also why you've seen some communities bring them back. So the downside is they're costly. Actually, the longer people live, the more you're paying a pension. It's just how it is. But back in the day, it was a fantastic recruitment tool for cities to get people. As most of you probably heard growing up and starting your careers, the reason why people wanted to go work in government, salaries are lower, but your benefits were fantastic. That's kind of flipped nowadays, where the private sector and public sector are pretty mirrored nowadays. But for the next few years, we're going to see those pension liabilities continue to grow, and we're gonna have to keep paying them. There's no way around it.
Yeah, about 8 or 9 years ago, we put in $1 million into our pension, our MERS fund, and at that time it was fully funded. But then they changed GASB changed the regulations in terms of how it's funded, and I believe we're at about 80%. Yeah, about 80% funded. So
I think, just to be clear, the question was, do any new administrative staff receive MERS pension benefits? That's
No, anyone hired since almost a decade ago don't get it.
okay. So the answer to that was no. Next question. What will happen if the city can't afford to meet its obligations? Are we facing a potential bankruptcy or being assigned an emergency manager?
I'll let you guys take that.
That would be worst case scenario. I'd say we'd have to bring in $0 for the next few years for that to happen. But naturally, we've seen in the state, it's always a hot topic in the news. At a certain point, cities don't meet their obligations, and they will go into receivership from the state. And at that point, it's the state's call. No one gets to say besides the state, and they stay as long as they have to right the ship, as they say. But even after they do that, the city's never the same.
Next question. A budget includes revenue and expenses. What is being done to address cutting costs/expenses in the budget now and going forward? Administrative costs are a major concern and have increased substantially in recent years.
You want to start that? I'll talk about the administrative costs when you're done, but.
Yeah, so expenses, what we did this year, naturally as new staff, we reviewed all of our expenses to see what was actually needed, what could go, what could change. And it's everything from our current contracts that we know are coming up over the next couple of years that we're gonna bid out, to little things, to even business cards. For example, when I arrived, we were purchasing business cards and they were $200 for a set of 250. We've changed that now to something else. So current staff is being very diligent with our purchases, but as we've talked about multiple times today, no matter what we buy, inflation's gonna hit us, and we're doing everything we can.
Yeah, and when I did that analysis, in the first 3 months of the year, it was surprising to me how many things had already been looked at, and I went in to meet with Chief McKee, and knowing that you saw up there that the police represents 58% of our budget. I expected to go in there and just find couple $100,000 worth of expenses to cut, and as we literally went through line item by line item by line item, and kudos to Chief McKee. I mean, he's been really good about cutting those, cutting things to the bone and finding really creative ways. For example, he found a creative way to dramatically reduce training costs, so that the officers got the training that they need, but we weren't sending them out. They were able to do a lot of it virtually through I can't remember what the program is called, but all the officers have access to this, and they can do a lot of their training without having to go and pay more costly programs on site. I do want to address the administrative aspect of that question, because it's something that's been brought up over and over again over the years. So in fiscal year 19, our administrative expenses were $431,000 roughly. In fiscal year 24, they're $898,000. So it's an increase of about $467,000. Now, if you look at do a variance analysis and look at, what is it that's driving those increases? So over that time, $203,000 of that was fringe benefit costs. So, healthcare benefits, disability, and so forth. So again, there's not a lot you can do about that. It's not we're paying the people too much, or have too many staff or anything like that. I mean, it was $203,000, almost a little bit less than half of that amount was due to fringe benefits. $70,000 of that was due to raises and promotions over those, 5-6 years, and additional salaries. So as we know, we've had several city administrators over the last 6 or 7 years, and at times we've had to, being down staff, we had to split 60 hours worth of work among existing employees, and to do that we had to pay them a premium, which cost the city a fair amount. 30,000 of that is elections. So there's been a lot of changes to election law. So as I think you all know, we've got early, thank you, absentee voting that starts earlier, requires a lot more work from our clerk, as well as 9 days of early voting. Now, again, talking about ways to save money, we partnered with the county so that we didn't have to have security and 24-hour security here, and staff this room for 9 days in a row. So it saved us a lot of money, but it still ended up costing us $30,000 more in elections. We had some new positions. We had the DDA Special Operations Manager. Most of that was funded through the DDA, but we picked up about 10% of that, so that's another six grand or so a year. And then we added a government ops position, so salary and benefits. You're talking $60,000 a year. We also, as council, when we hired, so this is going back, when we hired Cheryl Mitchell as our city administrator, the prior administrator that was terminated, the city had tried to go with somebody who had less experience with less cost, and so when we hired Cheryl and subsequent city managers, we paid a premium. With Cheryl, we paid an extra $30,000 to get somebody who had 30 years of experience, a PhD, and it was worth it for the city. And then you had a lot of other administrative costs that get associated, one-time hits in that period. So I think at the beginning of that period, we were still paying out that city administrator that we had terminated. The council at the time had given that person an $80,000, basically a year's salary. I'm blanking on my words now. Help me out when you leave. Severance package, and the city was paying that out. We've had increased legal services. So in the election 2 years ago, there were some challenges. We ended up for independence purposes, we had to hire an election law firm. We were billed $25,000 for that. That goes into administrative fees. Now, we'd actually negotiated that down to $18,000, but it was still a hit. And then, there was a lot of turmoil on council over the last couple of years, and that required a lot more legal expenses as well. So all of these things together, totaled into that $460,000 of increase in administrative expenses. And again, I don't know how you get rid of that. You can't change the fact that, elections are costing us more money. You can't change the fringe benefits. There's not a lot of fat in there to cut without cutting staff, which again is going to mean less services to the residents. So wanted to address that because again, the question of administrative expenses comes up a lot, but there are explanations for it. So
That being said, I mean, this committee should still look at it, right? We need to put everything on the table. There are costs and benefits to any single potential option to grow revenues or reduce costs, so you don't just dismiss it out of hand, but it needs to be considered, but we really need to take into account, well, what is the cost to the city? What are we gonna lose if we make a cut in staff salaries, for example, or staff benefits?
Can I ask something real quick? So have we done any kind of benchmarking analysis of where we stand compared to other cities of similar size in terms of our admin costs, personnel, police, whatever it is? Have we done anything like that, or are we comfortable with where we stand?
The city hasn't done a formal analysis like that in a long time. One of the issues, even from my experience just being in Metro Detroit, it's tough to do it from an aspect of similar sized cities. You are doing it versus Metro Detroit. Because for the most part, people that work in government, if you work in government in Metro Detroit, you're willing to travel to any city in Metro Detroit. So we have, even though it'd be nice if we could do a straight comparison of 4,000 population cities, we have to compare against essentially everyone from 4,000 to probably what, 30,000 to make it even equitable. So it's a unique aspect, but no, the city hasn't done a formal study like that in a while.
yeah, and what we have done is I don't remember how many years ago it was. I'm going to guess maybe 4 years ago. We had the MML do a compensation study for our staff to determine how they were compensated. And I know a lot of people want to say that our staff are overcompensated. Well, that study showed the opposite, and that was one of the things that we were trying to correct with some of the salaries and promotions that we made.
Okay. Next question. Is cannabis the answer? How much revenue versus expenses will be incurred in the next 5 years? And significant money.
So, first off, just let me be clear that nobody on council has anything to do with what's, I think a lot of you know that there's an initiatory petition for cannabis. So there's a group out there that is collecting signatures to change the charter. So we know 2 years ago the city voted and the charter was changed to prohibit cannabis. So they have I think one petition to change the charter, and then they have another petition that is the initiatory ordinance to set up an ordinance to allow, I think it's 2 cannabis facilities. But Kelly's gone. Jail, there he is. So none of us have, that's not a city-sponsored event. The city has no hand in that. The only thing that the city will do with that is that if it's deemed to be a valid petition and they have the valid number of signatures, it'll come to council, and council has 2 choices and 2 choices only. We can either adopt the ordinance or we can put it out to the voters. And I can say with confidence that I don't think council would adopt it without a voter input. So if that happens, it'll go out to the voters. In terms of revenue, the revenue per facility that came back to municipalities from the state was roughly about $60,000 per facility. So if we had 2 facilities as the ordinance, or as the petition is trying to set up, we would get $120,000 a year from the state, which is, for our budget, is significant revenue. In addition, well, I can talk from previously when we were working on the ordinance, the scoring criteria that we had for the ordinance gave extra points for community benefit, and in between the time when the ordinance was passed and then there needed to be a resolution to start the application process, and in between that time there was a new election and we had a new council, and we decided in the new council to put it out to the voters. But had we, so in that interim, we had organizations who were dealing with our economic developer who were ponying up about $500,000 improvements to parks and so forth. So there's a potential economic benefit that way as well. Although, to be honest, I don't think these organizations are going to be wanting to pony up $500,000 at this point, because back 2 years ago they were looking to get their foot in the door, and now there's a lot of these places. So I think it would be a lot less, but there would still be some economic improvement there. And then the other thing where you'll see some economic improvement is they're more than likely going to improve their building. So there could be some improvement there. But again, this is independent of the city.
So the other part of this question is revenue versus expenses. So how many additional expenses would need to be incurred by the city in the next 5 years if cannabis dispensaries were actually established in the city? And anybody that could state a number against that, it's conjecture, right? We don't know what it is. We should. I think maybe the Finance Review Committee should look at other communities and see how much it costs them, and maybe an increased public safety or traffic control or code enforcement or things like that. But you can't, all you can do is look at comparable communities and say, this is what they're incurring. It has some relevance in terms of decision making, but it's no guarantee that the cost to our city would be the same, less, or more.
Yeah, and typically the reason why cities charge such a high application fee, so when we had the prior ordinance, I think we were talking $5,000 per year per application, so they'd have to renew their license every year at $5,000, is to cover those kinds of costs and those expenses that we might incur.
Next question. Anybody else? We haven't gotten to that point yet. We will get to the podium soon. Next question is, why has the city administrator and staffing costs increased so drastically in the last 5 years? And in parentheses, it says cost of living ? And it looks like there's so maybe there's 2 questions here.
No, I think we answered the first one.
Okay.
I think that was the administrative cost that I talked about.
Okay. The next question is, do we need the Lathrup Village DDA ? Benefits versus actual city running programs? I think that was also addressed earlier.
So the answer to the compensation question was really, we determined that we were actually too low, right? Based on that MML evaluation, and we needed to get back to market. And there was all kinds of other factors. We had to pay premiums and all that stuff too, right?
Yeah, I guess part of that is being competitive in the marketplace against other municipalities who are also trying to hire those candidates that are qualified to fill staff positions. So.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier as well, we've had a lot of staff turnover, and the labor costs are higher because it's just a really tight labor market. So to get somebody in here, there's inflation there. So that I didn't even mention that in terms of when I was talking about the increase in administrative costs, but that's a factor as well.
Next question is the last card we have. Priorities. What are the top 3 priorities of the current city administration?
I serve at the pleasure of the city council. So whatever you guys' priorities are, we enact. But no, for me, it's number one, staffing. Since I've been here in this past 6 months, I've had to replace nearly all of the administrative staff due to staff turnover. That has been a nightmare. There's no ways around it. Luckily, I've found great support. Michelle was my first hire. Been fantastic so far, and we've slowly done this. So taking care of staff has to be number one priority for me, because without a good staff, quality of services for you and everyone else is going to drastically decrease. Then for me, from my perspective, then next it comes to facilities. This includes buildings and parks. When I came here, visited the community, just like all of you, I tried to live here. I thought the houses were fantastic. I thought the yards were fantastic. So I wanted to be a part of this community. Fortunately, personal life, couldn't find a house, but when I come around here and see the beautiful houses, but then I come see the city facilities from City Hall to the parks and seeing how much love they need, that's the next aspect I really want to tackle. But that's going to take time because it's very expensive. And as for a third priority, it's getting services back to a level that the residents expect. That's everything I've heard since I've gotten here is the residents believe the perspective I've been told is that services have decreased over the past decade or so. My job as city manager is to responsibly bring that level up so you guys feel you are being provided for. And I wish I could just flip a switch and that it all happened, but no, this is something that's going to take a long time.
Yeah, and from my perspective as a council person, and Jalen and Jason, you can put in your top three as well. I would say financial stability, which is a big part of the role of this committee, you know, making sure that we find a way to sustain the revenue and grow our general fund. For me personally, I think you guys all know that one of my priorities for the city is infrastructure. You know, we have put so little money in infrastructure over the last several decades, and it's been a big problem. We saw what was going on with our roads, so we did a road millage. We did a road bond so that we could improve our water flow. We're still working on that, but we made a lot of improvements with respect to our water and sewer system. And then, you know, again, I would echo what Mike said is you know, just getting the services and basically customer satisfaction, resident satisfaction, making sure that the residents are happy with the services that they're getting from the city. Phone calls are answered, questions are answered, issues are addressed, things don't slip through the cracks. I mean, that's been a huge problem for the last, at least the 7 years that I've been on council, and we've been making some really good progress on that as late. I don't know what Jalen and Jason would say is their top three, but that would be for me.
Well, I was just reminding myself, we, in a study session back in May, we actually discussed the city council goals. So the high-level topics we came up with in no particular order, so they aren't necessarily prioritized, but they all are priority topics. Our transparency, so for me that means improved communication. It means transparency in the decision-making, communication to both residents and businesses about what the city is doing and considering doing and why we're considering doing it, providing opportunities like this for resident and business input into decisions that the city is making, and more. Communication plan is something personally I campaigned on and I've been talking about in council meetings and in study sessions, and it's something that my goal is to make sure that we have a communication plan defined within the next couple of months. And I think that's part of transparency as well. So the next high-level topic is budget and fiscal viability, which Bruce already referenced. Another one is community enhancement. So this comes down to everything such as, obviously, you know, providing events and activities in the city, to beautification projects, marketing the city to try and bring new businesses and new property owners, residential property owners, into the city, partnering with the DDA in order to beautify our downtown district, acknowledging people who contribute through volunteerism to the city. It's something that the city has had a heritage of doing in terms of things like the Lions Club and the Women's, Lathrup Village Women's Council and other organizations. We need to continue to recognize people when they put extra effort to help support the city. Next one is business and economic development. So again, I feel like this is a bit of marketing the city to try and bring businesses in and partnering with the DDA to do that. And then a dedication to service. How do we get things to run more efficiently? How do we leverage technology and new ways of doing things in order to make it easier for people to do things like pay bills or get services from the city? And how do we behave professionally as a council and as a staff as we're serving the community? So I think out of all that, like transparency and communication, those are that's my like number one priority. Anything to add, Jalen?
I share the same sentiments. I don't need to. We all agree, so.
So that's the last question that we have on the cards.
Okay. So let's open it up for public comment. So if anybody wants to comment, we've got the microphone or.
Just a question on the status of the new software for the city purchase
The website?
website. Thank you, yes.
Oh yeah, of course we were running behind on that. As soon as we lost staff, it all got thrown back. So it's back on my plate. Probably a couple months realistically, but we got it.
Thank you.
How's it going? Ian Ferguson. Just want to cover 3 items. Mike, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I think your life expectancy is probably 3 years based on the history of city managers. So you probably would need to consider at least staying in place for 4 years in order to do a full turnaround of staff, because that's going to take a lot for you to do that, especially the Parks and Recreation position, which is very difficult to fill. I understand that the salary that individuals are asking for is very difficult, so you're going to need 4 years to do that. Really, please consider that, because that will dictate how staff operate as well as how council will interact with you. That's the first thing. The second thing is I have the petition for anyone who's interested in signing so we can get cannabis on the ballot for November. I have it here. If you wish to sign, please raise your hand. I'll bring it over and you can sign it. Really appreciate it. It is a resident-run petition. No member of council even knew it was happening until last couple days. Last thing is that based on the last 2 years, we had some real contentious issues going on council. We really had a toxic work environment going on with council, and that's one of the reasons why most of the staff departed abruptly. That history is now out there, okay? A lot of people really don't want to work at Lathrup Village. So this financial committee has to really take into account how you repair that, number one, and number two, how do you look for people who want to come and be a part of this for 3 years? Because it's going to take 3 years to really build that trust back, because it's about trust at this point. We had a lot of turnover on council, and I believe that we're going in the right direction, but again, we still have that issue that you really need to address. That's a part of the financial situation. Last part, and I guess this was serendipitous, you talked about cannabis. Yeah, $118,000 may not sound like much, but for a household, if you get $118,000, you probably pay down your mortgage, you probably put money in your kids' college tuition, you probably take a really nice vacation. That's what cannabis is going to bring to this city, $118,000 a year, $59,000 per retail establishment. When I was on the cannabis committee, along with Salim Siddiqui, we went through the entire process and we were anti-cannabis. And it turns out that all the information that was going on in our head was not accurate. So I entertained the thought, and I challenge anyone to go out there and do the research, and you realize I'm right. Thank you.
Hey guys, Tom Kinez. A couple of those questions that I threw to you guys, you did a really good job in answering them. Now, we have some people on this committee that I see that, one, I'd like to hear from them, because this is a committee. It's not an extension of the council out there. Siddiqui, I don't know you that well, but you were on council before. You guys have some backgrounds here, okay? So ask you to, open up a little bit. Now, we had an information from someone that as the people that were going around with the petitions were signing, that there was someone involved with it from the council. That's all it is. Okay, guys? Be upfront. We know what we're doing here. If there's gonna be another truck out there, just put the truck out there. The verbiage that was there, maybe most of the people here, yeah, we're older folks that, yeah, we're not yet retired, Bruce. I'm working on it, though. I'm working on it. I'm a Southfield Lathrup boy like you. You beat me there. But I would also say from a staffing, Michael, maybe look to people that live in the neighborhood. We have good people that probably don't need benefits, that would answer the phone, do some of those things that maybe will save us some funds for a short term. With the cannabis, one thing that wasn't answered was the police costs. I've talked to other communities. You guys know what I do. I'm out and around with a lot of different groups. I see it, and again, facts versus actual. What is that going to represent? It's a concern. It's a concern. Yeah, I've lived here 39 years. I'm hoping to live here 5 more years. Fine. Who's going to come in? When I move, somebody comes in my house and they're paying more taxes. So if you get a flip of about 30%, yeah, you know what? You can cover your issues as long as you balance your checkbook. We have not balanced our checkbook since 15 years ago. We've had a lot of things thrown at us. So with that, do your due diligence. I see a lot of very intelligent people. I got a soccer player here, poor guy. But let's do that and open the communication up so that it's not, one group versus another group. Let's make some good decisions. If you're gonna bring cannabis in here, like I talked to the one gentleman the one time here, great guy. He had marketing dollars, he set up the yin yang. Okay, what is the actual? Are you gonna fix our parks and areas for us? Is that a priority? Do we have kids here anymore? I don't know. I don't see a lot of them around. My neighbor, on my 3 blocks around, there's nobody. It's times have changed. Do kids go out? No. They stay home with this damn thing. So make sure you got good poles though, so they get good reception. Bruce, I'm teasing you. So thank you for your time. That's the biggest thing. Okay, we've all put time into this, whether it's council for 3 years, 15 years there. I was on, the Parks and Rec with Rose Merrily. Anytime she needed something, it was done. We picked weeds at all these parks. We didn't wait for people to do it. We reacted. So, react. That's all I ask you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Loretta DeLoche, and this has to do with working. How many years do you have to work here before you could retire and get a pension? I was surprised that they gave out pensions. I didn't even see anybody working long enough to get a pension. So how many years do you have to work to get a pension? Not that I'm looking for a job.
Well, there's nobody who's eligible for, well, there's 2 people who are still here who hired in when there was a pension program, but other than that, there's nobody gets a pension.
Oh, so there's no pension plan now?
No.
Oh, okay.
All 401K.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? All right, just open it up for committee and council comments. Anything?
I'll make a quick comment, just that I think the people on this committee are gonna do their best to figure out, okay, what's the best ways to get some more revenue into the city, and is there an opportunity to cut costs? We'll look at all of that, and I agree that, we all want to do what's best for the city, and we'll go ahead and do that. And also, I think we want open communication. I think all our meetings are open, right? I mean, everything is available for anyone to come and watch and comment, and the meeting notices will be posted. So, please come and help out. Give us your opinions, give us your feedback, and let us know if we're not looking at the right things, and hopefully we can make some headway.
I'll say something. Is this thing on? I was pleased to see the diversity of faces, experiences, professional acumen around the table the first time we met a few weeks ago. I work as a financial controller. I have for about 15 years. We've got a CPA on the committee. I believe one of us is a retired credit manager. There's diversity of experiences in the accounting world. So I'm hopeful that that diversity lends itself to a positive result. In spite of that diversity, we all have many things in common. Namely, we all live here and we pay taxes, and obviously we want the most prosperous, beautiful, well-functioning community possible. So speaking for myself, but I'm sure the other members of the committee would agree that we're coming at this in nothing but good faith. And hopefully what we come up with by the end of it is something that the council deems reasonable and that the voters deem reasonable as well, should it come to that. So I appreciate the council for putting its trust in those of us that you selected, and I personally know that I'll do my best and do my due diligence to produce the best possible result. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that I'm appreciative of the efforts of everybody on the committee. It's an important job and a big job to try and identify any opportunities or options that we have to either reduce costs or increase revenue, and we're going to have to look under rocks and to do that. But the committee can't do it on their own. Salim and Tim both just mentioned, like, we want input, they set up this town hall in order to receive input. People should continue to feel emboldened to provide input to this committee in whatever way you feel comfortable with. Right? If you don't want to filter a question or an idea through Bruce, find one of the other committee members and give the information to them. Call them, email them, find them at a city event.
Can you post those? That'd be great.
Well, it's up to the committee to decide what they want to do.
Obviously, the communication line is good.
Yeah, so direct communication would be the best, and so it's up to the committee to decide what channels they're going to provide, but I agree, that would be great to be able to provide email addresses at a minimum so you can communicate directly with the committee members and provide your ideas. My hope is that people came here today and didn't feel like their ideas were ignored.
All right, Tom, I just want to say one of the reasons I think why the committee didn't have a lot to say is not because they're shy, but we've only had one meeting, and the meeting that we did was pretty much the same that we just did here.
It's the same thing
Yep.
we did upstairs.
Yep.
You know what? You're better at it now. It flowed even nicer. But to your point, I'm saying, there's some people out there that are
Yep.
very interested in hearing what's going on.
Yep.
And
And that's one of the reasons why we did this, and another reason why we did this is, and why we're recording it, is so that, more residents can see it. As I think I said in the beginning, part of the goal here is to educate the residents on what we're dealing with, because we want your input. We want you to come to our meetings. We want you to send us emails. We want you to give us, you guys have good ideas too. We got a former council person sitting here, who I'm sure has ideas that they could share with the committee. So we're all starting now at the same, same level of knowledge, and so, come to our meetings, provide us with comments, and participate. And then the other thing I realized, I never introduced Michelle. I think you guys figured out who she was from Mike, but Michelle Townsend is our treasurer. So I think that's it. I want to thank you guys for coming. I want to thank the committee again. I want to thank council for coming. Mike and Michelle for putting the lecture.
Can I also say, with some levity and a little bit of heartburn. I purchased my home on San Quentin in the summer of 2022. The purchase price was astronomical, the mortgage rate sucks, and the tax bill is worse. I have every motivation in the world to not spend any more money than I have to. So again, anecdotally and partially in jest, but I am particularly motivated, personally motivated, to make this thing work out in the best possible way. So, thank you.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming.